The morning sun painted the crystal towers of Ethermore in shades of gold and silver. Princess Lyrali stood on her balcony, watching the city wake up below. At 127 years old, she was still considered young by elf standards, but her deep green eyes held wisdom that impressed even the oldest council members. Today was important. She was going to the human lands to talk about trading magical crystals. These crystals kept their kingdom safe from dark magic, and they needed more. The humans had some, but getting them required careful talking and trust building. "Are you sure about this trip?" asked her sister Celestini, walking into the room. As the oldest princess, Celestini would one day be queen, but she worried about everything. "Someone has to go," Lyrali replied, adjusting her traveling cloak. "Father thinks I'm the best choice because I actually like humans. Most of our people think they're all troublemakers." "Maybe they are," said Aurelia, the youngest sister, practicing sword moves in the corner. "Remember what happened to the last diplomatic group? They came back talking about rude humans who didn't want to help us." Lyrali smiled sadly. This was exactly the problem. For hundreds of years, elves and humans had lived separately. Most elves thought they were better than humans because they lived longer and had more magic. Most humans thought elves were stuck up and didn't care about regular people's problems. "That's why we need to try harder," Lyrali said. "Fighting never solved anything. If we can't learn to work together, both our peoples will suffer." The royal guards were waiting in the courtyard. Captain Valderon led the group, 20 of the kingdom's best warriors. They would escort her to the border, where human representatives would meet them. King Theron hugged his daughter goodbye. His silver hair caught the morning light as worry lines creased his face. "Be careful, my child. The world outside our borders isn't always kind to those who seek peace." Queen Miraleth held her daughter's hands. "Trust your heart, but keep your sword close. Some people in both kingdoms don't want peace." The journey started well. They rode through the singing forest, where the trees hummed ancient melodies. The guards told stories and laughed as they traveled the well-worn paths. Everything felt normal and safe. But as they got closer to human territory, things changed. The forest grew quieter. Birds stopped singing. Even the horses seemed nervous, their ears twitching at every sound. "Something feels wrong," Captain Valderon told Lyrali as they stopped for lunch. "My men are reporting strange movements in the trees. It might be nothing, but we should be extra careful." Lyrali nodded. She had learned to trust the captain's instincts. He had kept the royal family safe for 50 years. They decided to take a different path through Thornwood Pass. It was longer, but supposedly safer. The narrow mountain trail wound between tall rocks and thick bushes. Perfect place for an ambush. The attack came just after sunset. Dark figures jumped from the rocks above, shooting arrows and shouting war cries. These weren't ordinary bandits. They moved well, knew too much about elf fighting techniques. "Protect the princess," Captain Valderon shouted, drawing his silver sword. The elf guards formed a circle around Lyrali. But the attackers had planned this perfectly. They knew exactly where to strike. The battle was fierce and confusing. Metal clashed against metal in the growing darkness. Lyrali fought alongside her guards, her own blade flashing in the moonlight. She was trained well and could hold her own in a fight. But there were too many attackers. Slowly, the elf guards fell. Captain Valderon fought 3 men at once, protecting Lyrali until the very end. With his last breath, he pushed her toward a hidden path in the rocks. "Run, princess. Get home. Tell them what happened." Lyrali wanted to stay and fight, but she knew her duty. The kingdom needed to know about this attack. She grabbed her pack and ran into the dark forest, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she could hear the attackers searching through the battle site. They were looking for something or someone. She ran all night, following deer paths and stream beds. When morning came, she was lost deep in the wilderness, far from any elf or human settlement. Her beautiful traveling clothes were torn. Blood from small cuts stained her cloak. For 3 days, she wandered the forest, eating berries and drinking from streams. The poison on one of the arrows was making her sick. Elf medicine couldn't help because this poison was made specifically to hurt her people. On the fourth day, weak and feverish, she collapsed near a mountain cabin back in Ethermore. The remaining guards had returned with terrible news. They found the battle site and brought back Liralay's torn cloak, stained with blood. No other trace of the princess could be found. The news hit the kingdom like a lightning strike. The beloved princess was gone. People wept in the streets. The crystal towers dimmed as if the very magic of the kingdom was mourning. King Theron aged 10 years in one day. He sent every available soldier to search the wilderness. They looked in every cave, every valley, every hidden place they could think of, for weeks. They searched, but found nothing. Queen Miraleth locked herself in the highest tower, staring out at the forest where her daughter had disappeared. She refused to eat or sleep properly. "I can feel she's still alive," she kept saying. A mother knows these things. But as weeks turned to months with no word, even the queen began to lose hope. The attack changed everything in the kingdom. Lord Commander Dryas, who had always distrusted humans, gained more influence with the king. "You see what happens when we try to make peace," he told the council. "They plan these attacks. They want to hurt us." "We don't know it was humans who attacked her," Princess Celestini argued during one heated council meeting. "It could have been bandits from anywhere." "Bandits don't fight like that," Darius replied coldly. "This was planned by people who understood our military tactics. Only humans have studied our ways closely enough to plan such an attack." Many nobles began agreeing with him. The grief over losing Lyrale mixed with anger, creating a dangerous mood in the kingdom. Some called for immediate war against all human settlements. Others wanted to cut off all contact with the outside world forever. Princess Aurelia threw herself into military training. Determined to lead rescue missions, she practiced fighting day and night, pushing herself until she collapsed from exhaustion. "I should have gone with her," she kept saying. "I could have protected her." The kingdom that had once been a beacon of wisdom and magic slowly began closing its doors to the outside world. Trade stopped. Diplomatic meetings were canceled. The crystal barriers around the kingdom grew stronger, but the people inside grew more fearful and angry each day. In the human lands, news of the princess's disappearance created confusion and worry. Many human leaders had been looking forward to working with someone who actually wanted peace. Now they wondered if the elves would blame them for what happened. Some human communities began preparing for possible elf attacks. Old fears and prejudices that had been slowly healing started growing again. The fragile hope for peace between the two peoples was dying along with the belief that Princess Lyrale would ever return. Nobody knew that far away in the mountains, the princess was still alive, recovering in a place where no one would think to look for her. Nobody knew that her greatest adventure was just beginning, or that she would return home with ideas that would change both kingdoms forever. The story of her disappearance was ending, but the story of what she would become was just starting. 6 months had passed since Princess Lyrale disappeared from the world. During this time, the seasons changed, kingdoms grew more divided, and hope faded like morning mist. But deep in the Whispering Mountains, where few people ever traveled, a different story was unfolding. Chironwood lived alone in a cabin he built with his own hands. Once, he had been a soldier in the human army, fighting battles and following orders. But war had shown him too much pain and suffering. He saw friends die, villages burn, and families torn apart. The memories haunted his dreams. So he left civilization behind and came to these quiet mountains to find peace. His cabin sat beside a clear stream, surrounded by tall pine trees that sang in the wind. He grew his own food, hunted when necessary, and spent his days working with wood and metal. The scars on his arms told stories of old battles, but his eyes now held the calm that comes from choosing a simple life. On a cold morning in early spring, Kai was chopping firewood when he heard something unusual. A weak cry for help carried on the mountain air. He stopped working and listened carefully. There it was again. Someone was in trouble. Following the sound, he found a young woman collapsed near the frozen stream. Her clothes were torn and dirty, clearly from some noble family based on the fine fabric. But what surprised him most was her pointed ears and the faint glow that seemed to come from her skin. An elf. He had never seen one this close before. She was barely breathing, burning with fever, and covered in small wounds that looked infected. One arrow wound on her shoulder had turned black round the edges, poison, and not the kind that affected humans. Kai's first thought was to walk away. He had come to these mountains to avoid problems, and helping a royal elf would definitely bring problems. The last thing he needed was elf soldiers tracking him down, thinking he had kidnapped their princess. But as he turned to leave, he heard her whisper something in the elf language. Even though he couldn't understand the words, he could hear the pain and fear in her voice. Despite everything he had been through, Kai couldn't just let someone die. When he had the power to help, he carried her to his cabin and laid her on his bed. The poison was spreading fast, turning her veins dark under her pale skin. He had seen this type of poison before during the war. It was specifically made to hurt elves, and would kill her within days if not treated. Working quickly, he used everything he knew about field medicine. He cleaned her wounds, applied healing herbs he had learned about from an old mountain woman, and tried to slow the poison's spread. For 3 days and nights, he barely slept, constantly checking on her and changing her bandages. On the 4th day, her fever finally broke. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a rough-looking human man sitting in a chair beside the bed, stirring something that smelled like medicine. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. "Trying to sit up. Someone who found you dying by my stream," Kai replied without looking up from his work. "You've been unconscious for days. That poison nearly finished you." Lyrali studied his face. He had kind eyes but seemed uncomfortable, like he regretted getting involved. "Why did you help me?" "Most humans would have left an elf to die. Most elves would have left a human to die too," he answered. "Doesn't mean it's right." As days passed and Lyrali grew stronger, the two began talking more. She learned that Kai had been a soldier who got tired of fighting. He learned that she had been trying to make peace between their peoples when she was attacked. But their conversations often turned into arguments. Lyrali talked about unity and understanding between races, while Kai laughed bitterly at her. "Ideas? You think it's that simple," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Just shake hands and forget hundreds of years of distrust? I've seen what happens when humans and elves try to work together. Someone always gets betrayed. That's exactly the attitude that keeps our peoples apart." Lyrali shot back. "If everyone thinks like you, nothing will ever change. And if everyone thinks like you, they'll end up dead in the forest with poison in their veins." Kai replied harshly. Despite their disagreements, they began to understand each other better. Lyrali learned about the human perspective on the conflicts. She heard stories of elf traders who cheated human merchants, of elf nobles who treated humans like servants, of promises broken and trust betrayed. Kai learned that not all elves were the arrogant lords he had encountered during the war. Lyrali washed dishes, helped with cooking, and even chopped firewood despite her injured shoulder. She listened to his war stories without judging him and shared her own struggles with trying to bridge to different worlds. "You know what's funny?" Kai said one night as they watched stars through the cabin window. "I came here to get away from people, and now I'm sharing my home with an elf princess. You know what's funnier?" Lyrali replied, "I spent years learning about human customs and culture, but you're the first human who's actually treated me like a normal person instead of some exotic princess." Their peaceful life in the mountains was interrupted 2 months later when trouble found them. The same group of bandits who had attacked Lyrali's escort had been expanding their territory. They had heard rumors of a hermit living in the mountains and wanted to check if he had anything worth taking. 8 men rode up to the cabin one afternoon, armed and looking for a fight. Their leader was a big man with cruel eyes who clearly enjoyed intimidating people. Well, he said, looking at Kai standing in the doorway. "The mountain man has a friend. And what a pretty friend she is." Lyrali stepped out beside Kai, her hand moving to the sword she had recovered from her original fight, the bandits. Eyes widened when they saw her pointed ears. "An elf," one of them whispered. "Boss." That's the princess we were supposed to find months ago. The leader smiled nastily. Looks like this trip just got very profitable. We'll take both of you. The elf will bring a nice reward, and the human can work in the mines. What happened next surprised everyone, including Lyrale and Kai themselves. They moved together like they had been fighting as a team for years. Lyrale's elf magic and quick movements combined perfectly with Kai's human strength and tactical knowledge. She cast spells that confused the bandits and made their weapons heavy, while he used the terrain and his military training to outmaneuver them. When the bandits tried to flank them, she warned him with a look, and he set a trap that sent them tumbling down the mountainside. The fight was over quickly. The surviving bandits fled, and their leader lay unconscious in the dirt. As they stood breathing heavily after the battle, Lyrale and Kai looked at each other with new respect. They had fought together without even planning it, trusting each other completely in the moment of danger. That was Lyrale began. Amazing. Kai finished. I've never fought alongside anyone like that before. Neither have I, she admitted. It was like we could read each other's minds. That night, as they tended their wounds and planned what to do with their prisoner, something had changed between them. They were no longer just a human helping an elf or an elf grateful for rescue. They had become partners, people who trusted each other with their lives. We work well together. Lyrale said quietly. Yeah, Kai agreed. We do. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment of working together would change not just their own lives, but the fate of both their kingdoms. The princess who had disappeared was learning things that no royal education could teach, and the hermit who wanted nothing to do with the world was about to be drawn back into events that would test everything he believed about peace, war, and the possibility of change. While Lyrale and Kai found peace and partnership in the mountains, the kingdom of Ethermore was slowly tearing itself apart. The crystal towers that once shone with magical light now flickered weakly, reflecting the dark mood that had settled over the land. King Theron sat in his throne room, looking older than his 800 years. Letters and reports covered his desk, all bringing bad news. Border conflicts were increasing. Trade had stopped completely. The magical barriers protecting the kingdom were weakening, because the council couldn't agree on anything anymore. Your Majesty, said Lord Commander Dryas, entering with his usual stern expression, I have more disturbing reports from our scouts. Human settlements near our borders are building fortifications. They're preparing for war. The king rubbed his tired eyes. Or they're preparing to defend themselves because they think we're preparing for war. Does it matter? Darius replied coldly. The result is the same. Every day we wait, they grow stronger while we grow weaker. Princess Celestini, who had been quietly studying trade agreements in the corner, looked up with frustration. We're weaker because we're fighting among ourselves, not because we're not fighting humans. Lyrale always said that fear makes people do stupid things. Your sister is gone. Darius said harshly. Her peaceful ideas died with her. It's time to face reality. Celestini felt the familiar pain in her chest whenever someone talked about Lyrale being dead. She refused to believe it, but as months passed with no word, even she was starting to doubt still. She tried to carry on her sister's work, meeting with moderate nobles who still believed in diplomacy. But these meetings were getting harder. Every week brought new stories of human aggression or elf merchants being mistreated in human towns. Some of these stories were true, some were exaggerated, and some were completely made up. But they all fed the growing anger in the kingdom. Princess Aurelia had thrown herself into military training with frightening intensity. She practiced sword fighting from sunrise to sunset, studied battle tactics late into the night, and pushed herself until she collapsed from exhaustion. The palace guards worried about her, but nobody could make her stop. I should have been there, she told her weapons instructor during a particularly brutal training session. If I had gone with Lyrale, she would still be alive. You don't know that, princess. The old instructor replied gently. Sometimes things happen that nobody can prevent. No, Aurelia said fiercely, attacking the practice dummy with renewed fury. There's always something you can do. Always. I just wasn't strong enough, smart enough. Fast enough, but I will be next time. The instructor watched sadly as the youngest princess worked herself to exhaustion again. The whole royal family was destroying themselves with grief and guilt, but Aurelia was doing it with the most dangerous intensity. Queen Miraleth had become a ghost in her own palace. She spent most of her time in the highest tower, staring out at the forest where her daughter had disappeared. The servants brought her food, but she barely ate. They brought her reports from the kingdom, but she barely listened. I can feel her, she whispered to anyone who would listen. A mother's heart knows when her child is gone forever. She's still out there, somewhere. The queen's behavior worried everyone, but it also gave some people hope. If Queen Miraleth, with her powerful magical abilities, still believed Lyrale was alive, maybe there was reason to keep hoping. But hope was becoming dangerous in Ethermore. Lord Commander Dries and his supporters were gaining more influence every day. They whispered that the royal family was too weak to protect the kingdom, too blinded by grief to see the truth about human treachery. Look what happened to Princess Lyrale, they said. She trusted humans. And where did it get her? We need strong leadership, not weak dreams of peace. The most disturbing development was the spy hunt that had started after some very strange discoveries. Palace guards found evidence that someone inside the kingdom had been sending information to outsiders, patrol schedules, guard rotations, even details about the royal family's movements. All of it had been copied and passed along to unknown contacts. Captain Valdron's replacement, Captain Alexios, led the investigation with growing alarm. Someone has been watching us for months, maybe years, he reported to the king. They knew exactly when and where to strike Princess Lyrale's escort. This wasn't a random attack. The investigation created an atmosphere of paranoia and fear in the palace. Nobody trusted anyone completely. Servants were questioned about their activities. Nobles were watched for suspicious behavior. Even family members began to doubt each other. Who would do such a thing? King Theron asked during a private council meeting. Who would betray their own people? Someone who benefits from chaos. Captain Alexios replied grimly. Someone who wants war instead of peace. But finding the spy was proving impossible. Whoever was behind the betrayal was very clever and had covered their tracks well. The investigation was turning up small clues but no clear answers, which only made everyone more frustrated and suspicious. Meanwhile, the kingdom's magical defenses continued to weaken. The crystal barriers that protected Ethermore from dark magic required constant attention from skilled mages working together. But the Council of Mages was too divided by political arguments to focus properly on their duties. Queen Miraleth, in her grief and desperation, had authorized several dangerous magical rituals to try to locate her daughter. These rituals drained enormous amounts of power from the kingdom's reserves, leaving less energy available for the protective barriers. Your Majesty, the chief mage warned during one council meeting. We cannot continue these searching spells. They're exhausting our magical reserves faster than we can restore them. I don't care, the queen replied with unusual sharpness. Find my daughter. That's all that matters. But if the barriers fail completely, we'll be defenseless against any kind of attack. The mage protested. Then don't let them fail, the queen said coldly, ending the discussion. Outside the kingdom, the situation was equally troubling. Human settlements that had once been friendly to elves were now building walls and training militias. The news of Princess Lyrale's disappearance had spread far and wide, and different groups interpreted it in different ways. Some humans believed the elves were planning to blame them for the princess's death and use it as an excuse for war. Others thought the whole story was made up to justify elf aggression. A few still hoped for peace, but their voices were getting quieter as fear and suspicion grew louder. Lord Commander Dries used these developments to support his arguments for military action. You see, he told anyone who would listen, they're preparing to attack us. Every day we wait, we give them more time to get ready. But we don't actually know what they're planning, Princess Celestini argued. Maybe they're just scared because they think we're planning to attack them. It doesn't matter what they're thinking, Dries replied. What matters is what they're doing. And what they're doing is getting ready for war. The kingdom that had once been known for its wisdom and magical knowledge was becoming isolated and paranoid. Trade routes that had operated peacefully for decades were now considered too dangerous. Diplomatic missions were canceled or turned into military escorts. The very idea of talking to humans was seen as naive or even treasonous by a growing number of nobles. In the villages and towns throughout the kingdom, ordinary people felt the change too. Merchants lost business as trade stopped. Farmers couldn't sell their crops to human buyers. Craftspeople who had specialized in items popular with human customers found themselves without work. But more than the economic problems, people felt the loss of hope. For years, Princess Lyrale had represented the possibility of a better future, where elves and humans could work together and learn from each other. With her gone, that dream seemed to die too. The kingdom was like a pot of water slowly heating up. Everyone could feel the temperature rising, but nobody knew exactly when it would boil over. All they knew was that something had to change soon, before the pressure became too much to contain. What nobody realized was that the change they needed was already coming, walking through mountain paths with an unlikely companion, carrying knowledge that could either save both kingdoms or destroy them forever. Life in the mountain cabin had settled into a comfortable routine. Lyrale and Kai worked together like old friends, sharing meals, stories, and the daily tasks of mountain living. But their peaceful world was about to be shattered by a discovery that would change everything. It started when they decided to question the bandit leader they had captured during the attack on their cabin. For weeks, the man had refused to talk, claiming he was just a simple criminal looking for easy money. But Kai knew better. These weren't ordinary bandits. Regular thieves don't move like soldiers, he told Lyrale as they prepared for another questioning session. And they don't use poison specifically designed to hurt elves. Someone trained these men. Lyrale nodded grimly. She had been thinking the same thing. The attack on her original escort had been too well planned, too perfectly timed. Someone had known exactly where she would be and when. The breakthrough came when they found the bandits' hidden pack buried near where they had fought. Inside were letters, maps, and most shocking of all, official documents with the royal seal of Ethermore. This can't be right, Lyrale whispered, staring at a letter that detailed her travel plans down to the exact time she would pass through Thornwood Pass. Only the royal council knew these details. Kai examined the papers carefully. His military experience had taught him to spot forged documents, but these looked completely authentic. Someone in your own government set you up. The letters revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than either of them had imagined. The bandit attacks weren't random violence. They were part of a carefully planned operation to eliminate Princess Lyrale and blame it on human aggression. Look at this, Kai said, pointing to one particularly damaging letter. They were supposed to make it look like humans killed you, then leave evidence pointing to specific human settlements. It was meant to start a war. Lyrale felt sick as she read through the correspondence. The letters talked about her as if she were already dead, discussing how her death would be used to rally the elf kingdom against humans. They mentioned cleaning up the mess and removing obstacles to proper leadership. But the most shocking discovery was the signature on several of the letters. Lord Commander Darius, the man who had been pushing hardest for war since her disappearance, was the one orchestrating the entire plot. He's been planning this for years, Lyrale realized, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Every time I succeeded in building bridges with humans, every time we made progress toward peace, he found ways to undermine it. The letters showed that Darius had been secretly funding bandit groups, spreading false stories about human aggression, and even arranging for elf merchants to be mistreated in human towns to create incidents that would justify retaliation. Your own people are being manipulated, Kai said grimly. Darius has been creating the very problems he claims to be solving. More disturbing evidence emerged as they studied the documents. Darius had been positioning himself to take power when the royal family fell from grace. The plan was to let grief and fear drive King Theron to make terrible decisions, then step in as the strong leader the kingdom needed. He wanted me dead, not just to start a war, Lyrale said, her voice shaking with anger. He wanted to destroy my father's reputation and take the throne. The letters also revealed that Darius had spies throughout the kingdom, watching the royal family and reporting their every move. The paranoia and suspicion that had been growing in the palace wasn't just from grief, it was from real betrayal happening right under their noses. "We have to go back," Lyrale said, standing up with sudden determination. "My family doesn't know they're being betrayed from within. If we don't stop Darius, he'll destroy everything." But Kai shook his head. "Think about this carefully. If you just walk back into the palace with this evidence, what do you think will happen? Darius will claim the documents are fake, that you've been corrupted by humans, or that you're not even really you." He was right, and Lyrale knew it. After months of being missing, her sudden return would be shocking enough, returning with a human companion and accusations against one of the kingdom's most trusted commanders would seem impossible to believe. "He's had months to strengthen his position," Kai continued. "By now, half the court probably thinks humans killed you and the other half thinks your family is too weak to lead. Darius will use your return against you." They spent days planning their next move. Simply returning home wasn't enough. They needed undeniable proof of Darius's treachery, and a way to present it that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. "We need more evidence," Lyrale decided, "and we need to identify his other conspirators. If we only expose Darius, his allies will just continue the plan without him." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of another group of bandits at their mountain hideout, but this time Lyrale and Kai were ready. They had spent months learning to fight together, and these new attackers were no match for their combined skills. During the battle, they captured several more men and found even more damaging evidence, letters discussing upcoming attacks on human settlements, plans to blame these attacks on rogue elf groups, and most revealing of all, instructions to eliminate any witnesses who might expose the truth. "Look at this," Kai said, studying a map marked with attack locations. "They're planning to hit 3 human villages next week. Then they'll claim elf rebels did it and use that as justification for a full invasion." Lyrale felt time running out. If they didn't act soon, Darius's plans would succeed completely. The war he wanted would begin, and thousands of innocent people on both sides would die. But returning to stop him meant risking everything. If Darius managed to discredit them or have them arrested as traitors, the truth might never come out. The kingdom would fall into his hands, and the war would happen anyway. "There's something else we need to consider," Kai said quietly during one of their planning sessions. "When you return to your kingdom, what happens to us?" The question hung in the air between them. Over the months in the mountains, their partnership had grown into something deeper. They had shared dangers, dreams, and quiet moments by the fire. They understood each other in ways that went beyond words. But Lyrale was a princess, and Kai was a human, even if they succeeded in exposing Darius and preventing war. The political reality of their situation wouldn't change. A royal elf couldn't simply choose to be with a human, especially not in the current climate of suspicion and fear. "I don't know," Lyrale admitted. "I wish I could promise that everything will work out, but I can't. All I know is that right now, we have to try to save both our peoples from a war they don't really want." Kai nodded, understanding, but not hiding his pain. "Then we better make sure we succeed. If we're going to risk everything, we might as well make it count." As they prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives, both realized that returning to Ethermore would test not just their courage and skills, but everything they had come to mean to each other. The princess who had disappeared was about to return, but she would never be the same person who had left, and the human who had saved her was about to walk into a kingdom where his very presence could be seen as an act of war. The truth about Darius's conspiracy was finally clear, but revealing it would require them to trust not just in each other, but in the possibility that their peoples could still choose peace over fear, love over hatred, and hope over the comfortable darkness of old prejudices. The Harvest Moon Festival was the most important celebration in all of Ethermore. For over 1,000 years, the Elf Kingdom had gathered during the full moon of autumn to celebrate the year's blessings and renew their magical bonds with the land. This year, however, the celebration felt forced and hollow. The great hall was decorated with golden leaves and crystal lights, but the usual joy was missing. Too many empty chairs reminded everyone of friends and family lost to the growing conflicts. Too many worried faces showed the stress of living in a kingdom slowly preparing for war. King Theron sat on his throne, looking exhausted. The crown that had once suited him perfectly now seemed too heavy for his head. Beside him, Queen Miraleth wore her finest dress, but her eyes were distant, still searching for a daughter who had been gone for almost a year. Princess Celestini tried to maintain the traditional ceremonies, but her heart wasn't in it. She had been working desperately to hold together the peaceful faction in court, but every day brought new challenges. Princess Aurelia sat rigid in her formal uniform, her hand never leaving her sword hilt, even during the feast. Lord Commander Darius stood near the throne, dressed in his finest military uniform. To most people in the hall, he looked like the picture of loyal service, but his eyes held the satisfaction of someone whose plans were finally coming together. "Your Majesty," he said during a quiet moment in the ceremony, "our scouts report more human military movements near the borders. I really think we should consider mobilizing our full army." King Theron sighed deeply. "After the festival, Darius, let us have one night of peace." "Of course, Your Majesty," Darius replied smoothly, "but we cannot ignore reality much longer." The reality was that Darius had spent months positioning himself perfectly. The king trusted him completely. Most of the court believed his warnings about human aggression. The evidence of the kingdom's spy had never been found, leaving everyone suspicious and fearful. Everything was ready for him to take control when the royal family finally collapsed, under the weight of their grief and poor decisions. As the evening feast continued, people tried to pretend everything was normal. Musicians played traditional songs, though many lyrics about peace and harmony now sounded sad rather than hopeful. Dancers performed ancient stories, but even the tales of heroism felt distant and impossible. Then, just as the moon reached its highest point in the sky, something extraordinary happened. The massive doors of the great hall burst open with a sound like thunder. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the entrance. The musicians' instruments fell silent mid-song. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure that many people thought they would never see again. Princess Lyrale walked into the hall, alive and radiant, carrying herself with a confidence and strength that she had never possessed before her disappearance. But what shocked everyone even more was the man walking beside her, a human warrior, tall and scarred, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable with violence but choosing peace. His presence in the sacred hall of the Elf Kingdom was unprecedented and potentially explosive. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then chaos erupted. Queen Miraleth fainted completely, overcome by the shock of seeing her daughter alive. King Theron gripped the arms of his throne so hard his knuckles turned white, unable to believe what his eyes were telling him. Princess Celestini burst into tears of relief and joy, while Princess Aurelia jumped to her feet, her sword halfway out of its sheath before she realized this wasn't an attack. Throughout the hall, people shouted questions, accusations, and prayers of thanksgiving all at the same time. Some nobles fell to their knees in gratitude. Others backed away in fear, convinced this had to be some kind of dark magic or human trick. But no one was more shocked than Lord Commander Darius. His carefully planned world crumbled in an instant. The princess whose death was supposed to justify his rise to power stood very much alive, with evidence of his treachery and a human witness to back up her claims. "Seize them!" Darius shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is clearly some human deception. The real princess is dead. This impostor has been sent to weaken us before their attack." Several guards started forward, but they hesitated when they looked at Lyrale's face. This was clearly the princess they had known and served. The magical aura that surrounded all members of the royal family glowed around her, impossible to fake or duplicate. "I am Princess Lyrale of Ethermore," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the huge hall. and I have returned with proof of a conspiracy that threatens to destroy our kingdom from within." She raised her hand, and magical light filled the hall as she displayed the letters and documents they had recovered from the bandits. The evidence floated in the air, magnified so everyone could read the damning words written in Darius' own hand. "Lord Commander Darius orchestrated my attack," Lyrale announced. "He hired bandits to eliminate me and blame humans for my death. He has been manipulating events for years, creating the very conflicts he claims to be protecting us from." The hall erupted again as people read the evidence. Gasps of shock and anger filled the air as nobles saw the scope of the betrayal. Darius' allies began backing away from him, realizing their association with him could be deadly. "These documents are forgeries," Darius shouted desperately. "Can't you see? She's been corrupted by human influence. Look who she brought with her." This is exactly what they wanted, to place a puppet on our throne. But King Theron had seen enough, rising from his throne with more strength than he had shown in months. He spoke with the authority of centuries of kingship. "The magical signature on these documents is yours, Darius," he said coldly. "I have known your aura for 50 years. No human deception could replicate that." Realizing his position was hopeless, Darius made one final, desperate move, drawing his sword. He lunged toward Lyrale, shouting, "If I cannot rule this kingdom, I will not let it fall to human lovers." But he had forgotten that the princess who had disappeared was not the same person who had returned. Months of training with Kai had turned her into a formidable warrior. She sidestepped his attack easily, while Kai moved to flank him with the smooth coordination they had perfected in the mountains. The fight was brief but decisive. Darius, for all his political cunning, was no match for two people who had learned to fight as one. Within moments, he was disarmed and on the ground, held at sword point by the royal guards who had once followed his orders. As the immediate danger passed, the hall slowly returned to a different kind of chaos, the chaos of celebration and relief. Princess Celestine rushed to embrace her sister, tears streaming down her face. Princess Aurelia, for the first time in months, smiled genuinely as she hugged them both. Queen Miraleth recovered from her faint to find her daughter real and solid in her arms. King Theron walked down from his throne to embrace the child he had mourned for so long, his own tears making no effort to hide themselves. But even in the moment of reunion, practical problems remained. The kingdom had been preparing for war. Relationships with human territories were at their worst point in decades. The damage done by months of Darius' manipulation couldn't be undone overnight, Father, Lyrale said when the initial celebration had calmed down. "This is Kai Ironwood. He saved my life, helped me uncover the conspiracy, and chose to risk everything to help save our kingdom. I propose that he be appointed as our first human ambassador to begin rebuilding the trust that has been broken." The suggestion caused another stir in the hall. A human ambassador was unprecedented, and many nobles still harbored deep suspicions about human intentions. But King Theron, looking at the man who had protected his daughter and helped expose the greatest threat to their kingdom, made a decision that would change the future of both peoples. "Kai Ironwood," he said formally, "if you are willing to serve in this position, I hereby name you ambassador to the human territories, with full authority to negotiate on behalf of the kingdom of Ethermore." Kai bowed deeply, understanding the honor and the enormous responsibility being placed on him. "I accept, Your Majesty. I will work to build bridges between our peoples, just as your daughter taught me was possible." As the festival resumed with genuine celebration for the first time in months, Lyrale and Kai found a quiet moment together on one of the palace balconies. The kingdom spread out below them, its crystal towers beginning to shine with renewed magical energy as hope returned to the land. "What happens now?" Kai asked quietly. "Now we work," Lyrale replied. "It won't be easy. There's so much damage to repair, so much distrust to overcome. But we prove that two people from different worlds can learn to trust each other completely. Maybe we can teach others to do the same." They stood together, watching the moon set over a kingdom that was no longer divided by fear and hatred, but united by the possibility of a better future. The princess had returned, not just to her throne, but to a purpose that would define the rest of her life. And the human warrior who had saved her had found something he thought he had lost forever: hope that the world could be better than it was.